in that room. What would you say your mission is with your work? I mean, I know what I believe it is, but what, I mean, in terms of, I mean, you have different missions with different aspects of your work, but what would you think? And I know that one thing I would like to say is I think you reach a lot of people with your work. You reach the reader so that they can reach and further themselves. And it's like I said earlier, that they can start to dive deep into whatever interests them. But I'm wondering what your personal thought is on your mission or your legacy, so to speak. What the road you're paving for the.
Well, one thing I care about a lot is beauty. And I don't think that beauty has to be saccharine or sweet. I think that young people recognize beauty. I'll never forget a third grade girl, after I give a talk in the classroom, we have a Q&A. So they were raising their hands and they asked questions about the different animals or the, nature, the content of the book. One little girl raised her hand and she said, "Oh, I know, she raised her hand, but I didn't have time to call on her." So the class was over. So I packed up my stuff and the teacher came up and said, "Ellen wanted to ask you a question and you didn't call on her." And I'm like, oh, what? I'm so sorry. What would you like to know? She said, "How do you make them so pretty?" Oh, I get choked up just thinking about it. It's like children recognize beauty. And I put that quote on a yellow post-it and put it on my wall because children deserve good quality art. They don't deserve to have all these, generic cartoon stuff where all the figures look the same and they're all doing the same thing. They deserve to have individuality and to have detail and to have, when I was a child, you asked earlier about books. There was a book when I was quite young called, there's Andersen's Fairy Tales, illustrated by a guy named R0xieYou, who never did another book, but he did that book. And I pored over these beautiful drawings and the costumes and the settings with the fairy tales. Again, they weren't saccharine because, fairy tales can be pretty violent sometimes.
Right.
Cooking hands on Gretel in the oven. Anyway, and I set that book aside, when I grew up. And 30 years later, I took it out of my little library and I started to look at it and I realized that I had totally memorized. It was like I'd seen the book yesterday. As a child, I just never got tired of it. And I want to give that to children, something to give them, put their teeth into that they can look at. And there's now something called reading pictures. There's a buzzword out there. They teach children to read pictures. We've gotten to be a much more visual world, as we all know. And why not? The huge part of the brain is taken up with the visual, using the visual stimuli. And also, by the way, in a 60th of a second, you can just see